Hi, everybody. Welcome to JMBE Live. This is the first of a four-part webinar series featuring authors and editors from the Journal of Microbiology and Biology Education. And into the chat is going the link where you can go learn more about the call for papers that we're going to be talking about today with our JMBE editors. This meeting is being recorded, and you'll be receiving an email later this week, likely tomorrow, with how you can access the recording if you wish to view this again. Okay. If you need tech support during this event, just put a link, put a message in the chat to ASM Tech Support Justin. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the editor-in-chief of JMBE, Stanley Malloy.
Thank you very much, Rachel. So as Rachel said, today we're going to focus on the 2022 themed issue of JMBE. That's topic is opportunities and challenges in online instruction, blurring the lines between online and on-site teaching and learning. And I'd like to begin by introducing the panelist talking today. So first, you already met Rachel. She is the ASM brains and brawn behind the JMBE Live podcast. She's wonderful. She makes all of this happen, and I think brings a lot of exciting educational information to all of you in the audience. Dr. Miriam Segura-Toten is the senior editor for the themed issues of JMBE. She's a professor of biology and Harry Forrester Chair at the University of North Georgia. And we have three of the special guest editors of the themed issue with us today. Dr. Sumali Pandey, the Associate Professor of Biosciences at Minnesota State University at Moorhead. Dr. Samantha Parks, Senior Lecturer in Biology at Georgia State University. Dr. Khalif Collier, Associate Teaching Professor of Biology and Biotechnology at North Carolina State University. And Dr. Andy Pike, who's a lecturer in immunology and a curriculum fellow in online learning at Harvard Medical School. And I'm Stanley Malloy. I'm the editor-in-chief of JMBE, and I'm a professor at San Diego State University. So before we talk about the themed issue itself, I thought I'd just give you a little brief perspective on JMBE to set the stage. So JMBE publishes education research in a variety of STEM disciplines, a focus on microbiology and biology education, but it also includes all those other science disciplines that are key for that interdisciplinary understanding that our students need to be able to thrive as scientists and as educated citizens. This includes all levels of STEM education, from K-12 to undergraduate, graduate, and postgraduate education. And why you would want to publish in JMBE is because JMBE really represents a great place to publish education research. It's an open access journal, and it's indexed in Google Scholar and other major databases. So when you publish in JMBE, people can find your paper and read your paper. So you get a lot of readers that see that research work that you did. And a second reason is that in addition to finding, most editors, they work on finding reasons to reject papers. But the JMBE editors really focus on helping authors publish their work, providing helpful suggestions, working with authors when needed. We really want to make sure that the important education research gets out there so it can influence and improve education as we go forward. And one of the key things that JMBE does is each year, it has one of these special themed issues. You'll learn more about the 2020 issue in a minute, but first I thought I'd point out for you some of the issues from the last few years, because these special issues provide a great compendium of resources on particular topics. In 2021, last year, it was teaching in a time of crisis. In 2020, it was focused on inclusive science. In 2019, international science education. And in 2018, science communication. So these are all really key topics that we all think about on a regular basis when we're trying to improve and expand educational opportunities. So the themed issue isn't only good at the time it's published. These really are great resources to go back and read later as you go forward. And now I want to turn this over to Somali, and she's going to tell you some more about the upcoming special issue of JMBE. Somali.
Hello, I am Somali, as Dr. Malloy mentioned. So I'm going to talk about this themed issue for this year. It is called Opportunities and Challenges of Online Instruction, Blurring the Lines Between Online and On-Site Teaching and Learning. So we know that online instruction has been around for years, but the educational shift that happened as a result of COVID-19 pandemic exposed pretty much all instructors to some level of remote learning. So the next themed issue is based exactly on that. It will explore the wealth of practices that are encompassed by online instruction. We anticipate to see manuscripts that are focusing on lessons learned from this shift to remote learning. What components can we sustain now with regards to the online pedagogy? This could include best practices for instructional methods that incorporate an online component, for example, hybrid, high flex, flipped classroom, fully virtual, so on and so forth. What are the visions of the instructors for inclusiveness and student engagement in the online classroom? Novel approaches to achieve laboratory learning outcomes in a remote environment, assessment, meaningful assessments for online learning, and online and blended learning models for high impact practices like cures and service learning projects. So we think that this themed issue will generate great resources for JMBE's readership for instructors worldwide. And these would allow to integrate online teaching practices into the traditional teaching modalities. For the kind of topics these manuscripts can focus on, I would point you again to this link that Rachel posted earlier. This is in the chat window, and this will give you more in-depth idea into what kind of topics can you think about while submitting to JMBE. There are different types of manuscripts within JMBE that can be published. This could be research articles or perspective pieces or activities and tools or reviews of different kinds of theme resources. And Miriam is going to talk more about those different types.
Thank you, Somali. I wanted to add one little thing to that awesome explanation of our themed issue is that if you go look at that call for papers and you see that list of topics and you have a paper that you think fits the focus but is not on that list, notice that the language of the CFP says that those are the ones that we thought of when we put it together, but there might be other topics that also fit. So I would say I'm going to put my email address in the chat box, and oops, I've put it. I'll put it in there. I promise. But and you can email me with like whether your manuscript is suitable or not, or you can email one of the guest editors as well. Let me just type in real quick, because I sent that to the wrong person, but now it should go to everyone. Okay, so what I wanted to say, as Somali pointed out, is talk about the different types of articles that are published in JMBE. Now, most of us from other journals are more used to maybe like research papers and then review articles or perspectives and essays, but JMBE's a little bit different that way, and I think it's a good thing. JMBE has four main categories of manuscripts. We have the tips and tools, which are short manuscripts that are focused on practical, technical, and feasible advice for the classroom or laboratory. So they should be able to be adapted. Assessment is encouraged of whatever you're describing is encouraged, but not required. And like I said, it should be brief. The text and the figures should fit on 2 printed pages. Curriculum pieces are innovative field-tested activities, classroom, laboratory, field, online, right? Hybrid. The activities have to be adoptable by others. So you need to detail the instructions for students and instructor. And also you need to have assessment of the activity for this type of paper. The assessment needs to align to the learning objectives of the activity. So the learning objectives need to be stated, and you need to align your assessment and the result of your assessments with that. The research articles are more traditional articles that are original, hypothesis driven, or research question driven research on biology education. Rigorous assessment is required for this type of article. The assessment results need to align with the hypothesis or the research question. And then the last type is the perspectives article. It's kind of like a review or an essay in other journals. It places into a broader perspective a particular topic or problem that's of interest to the readership. And in the case of a themed issue, right, it fits within the focus of the issue. So within this paper, you want to identify the problem or the challenge, and then you want to back that problem or challenge up with published literature. You want to describe what's been published previously in terms of addressing that problem. Then you want to give your own viewpoint on this problem or challenge, being from, either things you've published already or observations in the classroom. And then you can also there synthesize the prior work and give us your take on it, and then give thoughts on the next steps to be taken. I have to underline that for these perspectives articles, even though they're more like an essay, an opinion, they really should be should include a thorough literature search as well. One other thing I wanted to say that I get a lot of questions on this is that at the end of the day, when the themed issue comes out, we organize the papers by topics, not by these 4 types of manuscripts that I've talked about. So you don't need to worry about submitting to a specific section of JMBE. You'll be submitting to the themed issue section, and then we'll organize by topic. The reason we still ask, there's some leeway in terms of formatting for the themed issue, but we do ask that authors try to write to one of these known or specific JMBE formats, because our reviewers are very familiar with the formats, and that way that helps with review of your article. So it's the best way to go about it. And so with that, I will open it up to questions, unless there's something else someone else wants to say.
So why don't we begin with the question then? And people can chime in as we go forward if some important thing pops in their mind. The first question, I think maybe we'll pass to you, Samantha, and that is, one of the things that's really pushed a lot of emphasis of this blurred boundary has to do with how COVID has influenced the way we do teaching and learning over the last couple of years now. Could you comment on how you see it's really influenced the education process you're in at your institution? You're in a hotbed of COVID at the moment, and maybe you could give some perspectives from that viewpoint.
I can give perspectives. I definitely don't think I have answers. Thank you, Stan. I'm in Georgia, as some of you are as well. And, we're seeing, just as the title for this call and for this theme, this blur, right? I think a lot of us were initially trained as in-person educators. There are some people who are more trained as remote educators, and we have completely kind of gone through, and now we're all in this blurred pot together. So we're seeing that people are editing their teaching practices. They're changing their approach to how they ask questions, including things like inclusion and equity, including our lab work. And so I think that this is a learning process for all of us. And so to me, I kind of see this issue as a way to express part of this learning process. We're still in the middle of this. And so we're seeing that you have some people who have started to go back and teach in person, others who are now in this hybrid flex capacity where they're kind of in between, and that might change week to week. There are faculty members who end up quarantined, or classrooms, lecture halls, labs that end up quarantined, or there are people who have household members getting quarantined. So these blurred lines keep switching every other week or so as people are learning how to adjust, going back in person. So it's varied. It's not a consistent approach, and I'm hoping that through this issue we can see how we're all managing.
Thanks, Samantha. So maybe we can then pass on the next question to you, Carlos. It would be really interesting to know how it's affected you personally, and where you think some of the challenges are in these blurred boundaries as we move forward. Challenges for the instructor in terms to really be an effective educator.
I think it has really made instructors rethink what their goals are, and whether those goals for the course require a physical space or can be done virtually. And for me personally, I love fiddling with technology till I either make it work or it breaks. And there are some fantastic online educators that have been doing this, as well as innovators that have developed systems for teaching organic chemistry with virtual reality labs, for example, here at NC State. And I am excited about the opportunities to learn from others what they are doing and how it's working, and what may work in one institution may be able may be read by the JMBE readership and scaled up and improved.
Thanks a lot, Carlos. So another question that we just got, I think might be most appropriate for you, Miriam, and that is, if my planned research manuscript does not focus on explicit laboratory procedures, but instead on a summative lab assessment, how would you recommend I reference the ASM biosafety guidelines?
That's a great question. So usually when we ask for someone to reference the biosafety guidelines or to address how they dealt with those or address them in lab, it's usually when they're describing an actual lab that requires these biosafety measures. Now, if you are talking about the assessment of the lab and not really addressing the lab itself in the paper, then you don't need to talk about safety. But if you are describing at least I would think that if you are describing the lab and there are, considerations of safety, students are dealing with live organisms or whatever, then you would have to reference them, even if the results of your manuscript are focused on the assessment. And one thing I will say is, like I said, feel free to email me if you have questions ahead of time. But if you don't do it and you need to do it, we will reach out to you. So we read through the manuscripts, and any that seemed like they need to address the guidelines or lab safety go through a lab safety review. And so you will get that feedback as well. So it's not a fatal flaw if you forgot to address that.
If I could just add to that, though, I think one thing that's really important is to try to address biosafety early on, likewise with human subjects. And if your institution does not have a good resource for that, contact us early, and maybe we can help connect you with a place where you can get good advice on that. If you do it from the beginning, it's always easier. Okay.
Yes.
So the next question, I'm going to come back to you one more time, Miriam, since you talked about the different sections. The question is the tips and tools section an appropriate place to publish a summary of preliminary data related to classroom resources? Yeah.
So I guess my short answer is it depends, but I will expand on that. So I think the tips and tools, you want to have something that's novel, that's like a tip, right? Or a tool, something that's novel, it's adaptable to the classroom, it's something small, you're not describing an entire course or something like that. It's an approach, but you can certainly in the tips and tools, you talk about preliminary data, because that would be of all the JMBE types, that's the one that has the least requirement for assessment. But if you're if you're describing a research study that has preliminary data, that would not fall under tips and tools. That would still fall under research, and that would be reviewed according to the research manuscript guidelines. So usually if it's a research study with a research question or a hypothesis and you have preliminary data, it's usually better to wait it out and gather more data, and or maybe see if you can extract from there the tips and tools part of it, and then work on the assessment for a later article. So hopefully that helps.
So Samantha, I'm going to pass this next one to you. And that is for someone that's the first time submitting. Question is, do you typically reject a manuscript if it needs work? Or do you help with tips on how it can be revised to be acceptable?
So that's a great question. With JMBE specifically, we actually really want to help you publish. So we go through, we'll help you with ideas for how to revise your manuscript. It's not typically going to be a reject and resubmit. Typically, we're going to try to help you to figure out what needs revision. And I will tell you, as somebody who has published in JMBE, sometimes those are minor revisions and sometimes they're a little bit more. And sometimes the little bit more is really pushing you to write a much stronger paper. It really helps you to develop your hypotheses and really helps you to answer the question in your own manuscript. So I wouldn't be afraid if you are a first-time submitter. We really, as editors, will try to help walk you through the process to the best of our ability.
Thank you. So Somali, a question is, what's your opinion about instructions and assessments for undergraduate students about establishing a microbiology laboratory online?
It has been a challenge indeed to do that online. So I'm looking forward to learn about the novel approaches that people adopted. There has been a lot of wonderful tools that I've heard about over the last year. Did you use any of those simulations and at-home kits, but also biosafety associated with home-based labs? So how did you all do it? This would be an interesting topic of conversation for sure, and something that has a lot of potential because, we talk about microbiology being very hands-on. Can we do it online? That's a question. And how can we do it online?
And I will add, just as an informational point for participants, that the 2021 themed issue already has some ideas for virtual labs or labs while we were teaching virtual or hybrid. I'm like Somali, I look forward to how things have moved on in the past year. But if you want to look at what's been out already, there's stuff out there.
And I'll just add, I think this is something that we all continue to learn from each other, and every new idea can spark a better way of doing it. And this is why the previous themed issue is so good as a resource if you're thinking about publishing in this next issue. But also just reading JMBE as a general rule, there's so much wonderful stuff in there to see. And if you're a first-time person submitting to JMBE, it's always good to go through some of those other articles to see how they do it, especially if you can find something analogous to the concept that you're trying to emphasize. So Carlos, this question's for you. My study employs mixed methods, and I was wondering if an editor could clarify if the journal has a preferred reporting method for mixed method studies. I want to ensure I remain consistent with the reporting style as another first-time author in JMBE.
Oh, that's a tough one, but a good one. Mixed methods, and first I would say that sounds like a really well thought out and detailed study, and I would be interested in seeing what it's about. And I would say that the editors and the reviewers need to know what you did. And while there are different ways of formatting that, clear description of your methods, your IRB approval, your alignment to learning objectives is critical. And in some cases, beyond the formatting, it's important to just make sure it's detailed enough that it's reproducible and in line with the expectations for the journal.
And if
Did
I
that-
may,
Yes.
yes,
thank
no,
you.
absolutely. You're absolutely right, Carlos. And I'll just add to that, one thing I would recommend, I agree with everything Carlos said. I don't think there's a set format. I think we're interested in, being able to reproduce or figure out how you did things methods wise. But that being said, what I would do is I would look at papers, that mixed method papers that have been published in JMBE, because there is, as someone who's published qualitative studies, as a collaboration with someone in a school of education who does qualitative work, definitely in DBER, in this field, we do things a little differently. So it's good to see what we're accustomed to, because that's what the reviewers are going to be used to. That being said, like everyone said already, we try to work with you. We're not just gonna reject if it doesn't match what we're expecting. I had a case like that with a qualitative study that got published in the last themed issue. And here's another thing, like they stuck to their guns to some of the things that they wanted to do, how they wanted to do them. And I was like, okay, let's do it. So we had a conversation. It's not, we'll work together to make this happen as well.
Thanks very much. So Samantha, I'm going to pass this next one to you. And it's a long question. So the question is, sometimes the purpose of an activity is to engage students to think more widely and deeply in a way that's beyond what they've been exposed to before. But it may not involve a particular content learning or critical thinking objective. Would data collected that students are engaging to expand their views in this way still qualify for the curriculum section or for tips and tools? And if it's sent to curriculum but's more appropriate to tips and tools, would that internal shift happen in JMBE?
That's a loaded but really good question. So I'm going to answer that in a few ways. First of all, I will say that if you submit to one section and it really needs to go in another section, yes, we will help with that shift. So that's in general for anything. For this, it really depends. If this is an activity that you are doing that could be applied in various STEM environments, because it's more related to, let's say, critical thinking rather than an actual content module, it's still an activity. It may still work best in tips and tools. If you're talking about something like a change theory, you're really kind of moving to a new way of approaching the discipline or a new way of thinking about the curriculum in general, that would be more for the curriculum section. So, Miriam mentioned earlier that sometimes you have to pull out the tip if that's what's there, and it might end up actually being either one paper now and one in the future, or some other type of split. If this is more activity-based, I would encourage you to look at the tips and tools section. If it's more curriculum and thinking about STEM or thinking about an idea, then it might be more curriculum.
So I just add, Samantha, that so JMBE has a revised online website, and it does a really nice job of distinguishing each of the different sections and what kind of content might be most appropriate for that section. And so I really suggest reading that carefully before you submit, although again, editors are happy to help you make sure it gets to the right place. So Somali, I'm going to ask you this next question. Somali runs this large immuno-reach network, and so I'm sure she's had this experience before in many cases. if we're writing about a particular online simulation or website, is there a preferred way to include the website link?
Well, I'm sure there is a format for that in the references section where they talk about how to include the website. But if you're talking about and explaining the website in general, then it has to be very well, the links should work. And appendices help too. So if you want to include information in appendices, that can be, included there. Online simulation or website. So what really the readers are looking to see is how can they use them, right? So whatever online simulation or website you're talking about, how can readers use them for their day-to-day work? That is what would be most helpful. So putting yourself in readers' shoes would be my best suggestion for this one.
I guess I would just add that sometimes web links die. That's one of the facts of life. And so it's really useful to have enough description that if somebody happens to read it later, they could track down an appropriate website or person who maybe did that website. And I think that's exactly this concept of referencing it properly, right? Somali, I'm going to go back to you for 1 second because I just mentioned that you're leader of this Reach network, which includes a wide diversity of people. And the issue of the balance between online and on-site learning, I'm sure is something that it has been some of the discussion in your Reach network. And I wonder if you might make a few comments about that and what you've learned so far from that, that influences the way we're beginning to think about needs in the future.
Well, one thing that has certainly become very clear with this online shift is that instructors don't have access to printing out multiple choice questions and handing it out. So the assessments, if they give those kind of questions online, it becomes a Google 101 course. So what are some of the meaningful ways to assess students so that it's not Google 101, right? So those conversations have come up quite a bit. Labs have been another big thing, second thing that, if they are not in person, how do we give them meaningful experiences? And as a result of that, a lot of online tools have come up, a lot of, databases that have become publicly available and a lot of data analysis. So it opens the world quite a bit. Does it take away from the hands-on experience? Yes, but can we simulate that in another way? That's a conversation that's happening quite a bit. So yeah, assessments and online labs would be the most interesting things that have come up in Reach network. That how do we do them? Plus, their labs are very expensive, so that's something that we have to watch out for.
Thank you. We might break right now. Rachel, this seems like a good time to do a survey of the audience. If we could post that, and it would be really useful if all of the participants could respond to the survey, because this is really important information for us to think about as we go forward.
You're right. So ASM is offering JMBE Live as a free event monthly through the end of the year. And in order to continue these kinds of events, we do need your feedback. So I have 4 very quick multiple choice polls, and we greatly appreciate everybody answering these 4 questions. It should literally take you 30 seconds. Click, click, click. 4 questions. We love your feedback, and we're not going to post your answers. Okay, so this is anonymous, and the data only goes to ASM. And we would love for everybody to participate because we need as many opinions as possible. And while you're thinking about that, I'm going to post into the chat a couple of links to get you more involved with ASM. So here's a link to volunteer and to get involved. It's a brand new website just launched within the last month. And it has lots of opportunities where you can volunteer time and your expertise to the organization. For instance, maybe you want to help with the Wikipedia edit-a-thon, or maybe you want to be the chairperson of the microbrews for ASMQ. We're looking for somebody to take that position. But there's, last that I saw, at least 10 different advertised positions to go get involved. So take a peek at that. And one more link I'll put in here is that we keep recordings of all these JMBE Live activities on our YouTube playlist. So into the chat, you can go back and you can look at previous JMBE Live recordings. I think we have about 10 already there. And the recording of this will be posted in a few days. And if you happen to miss any of the other webinars this fall, you can go to that playlist and catch up on all your activities. And with that, thank you so much for your feedback. Looks like we got the majority of attendees answering our poll. And we greatly appreciate everybody here. And I'm going to turn it over to our editors for a couple more questions.
Thanks, Rachel. So I want to pass this question on to you, Carlos. Somali mentioned some of the issues associated with thinking about immunology labs and the expense. And you have a lot of expertise with biotechnology education. And so I wonder if you could just give us a couple of comments on how you see this blurred boundary influencing biotechnology education.
And I'll piggyback off what Somali said, that we now have access to bigger, better databases, maybe as a consequence or even before the pandemic, several web-based tools updated their documentation to make it more user-friendly and accessible. So while we may be lacking those in-lab pipetting experiences, and that's a broader conversation of how does that affect learning some skills. We now have, in terms of bioinformatics, and we have lots of publicly available resources and the ways that those are being used and assessed to make sure that they are having an impact is really exciting for me. I can go on and on about that for a long time, but I'll stop.
Thanks very much. Miriam, I think that it would be really interesting to have some perspectives on how this blurred boundary goes across the spectrum of education, from K through 12 on through postgraduate education, including the kinds of continuing education that we all need to be able to move forward in our fields.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I mean, and I actually have anecdotal experience with most of those because my son is in, elementary school. So I've seen how, their virtual schooling environment prior to this pandemic was so unstable. And when we first went virtual, we were like, here we go, no one's going to learn anything. But, the teachers really stepped up and did an amazing job. So I think that speaks to the creativity and the work ethic of, educators. And I think, we don't usually, for themed issues, we don't see as many K through 12 articles, but, to the participants, if you know someone out there who's, tackled some of these issues in K through 12, that would be great to include some of those manuscripts as well. And then going through college, undergraduates, one thing that I think to me sticks out a lot and that I had wanted to mention too is equity, and how equity has intersected with, this technology and us getting a lot more comfortable with it. And so I think everything from, not having students print out things that now they can just download on, even their phones or a lab computer, to things like, trying more equitable grading methods like ungrading or competency-based grading, because now we have, bigger test banks online, and And we actually use a monitoring, proctoring software in my university, and that really, we don't have to deal with the Google 101 issue too much, I don't think. But anyway, so I think issues of equity have started to be addressed because of how much more comfortable we've gotten with this technology. And so I think that anyone out there who's thinking of, who has a project or has something they want to write about that, at the intersection of equity and online learning or HyFlex or whatever, that would be amazing, because I think that's very much needed. And then moving on into, graduate, I think there's a lot there. And we had some manuscripts in our 2021 issue talking about mentoring of graduate students during the pandemic. So I would love personally to see what things came out of there in terms of mentorship and research and helping with the isolation of graduate students and postdocs. I mean, that's got to be a really, really hard time for people in those levels of their career. And then moving on to professional development, I think we all have experienced that. Zoom has just made everything easier and given us more tools. For example, I know that, virtual conferences, right? Research conferences, we all, travel to faraway places, and we thought that was the only way we could share our research. And now we know there's an alternate way, right? And so that again, that speaks to equity as well, right? People who might not have the travel funds might now be able to engage in conferences. And so I know that many places are still, or many associations are still, societies are still trying to keep a hybrid component, at least even if we go back face to face. So looking at some of the impacts of that type of thing would be interesting as well.
I think that's a really nice example of the yin and yang of so many of these things, where there are challenges with equity associated even with access to the internet for some students. On the other hand, the ability to access certain things without traveling opens up the doors for some people. So there are a lot of these cases, and I think that's why getting the multiple insights in this themed issue will be so important for all of us in terms of thinking about the future. And the next question really focuses on thinking about the future, right? So why don't we jump back to you, Samantha? Can we keep both online and offline classes each week in the future that's post-pandemic, to take advantage of the benefits of each for students at all levels?
This is a question that our university is kind of struggling with as we planned for fall, and now as we're looking towards spring. Because we're seeing, so I'm at a very large urban institution, and we are seeing that there are students who are desperate to get back in the classroom. They are not performing well outside of the classroom. They're having trouble focusing and making their content meaningful. We have other students where this has opened huge doors for them. So students who have to work full time, who might have only been able to take 1 or 2 classes at a time in the evening, are able to increase their course load, are able to open the door into different classes that were not previously available online. So we are starting to talk about keeping more remote learning opportunities for our students, either as hybrids or having separate in-person versus remote courses, so that we can address the needs of all of our students. I think that as Miriam brought up and as others have spoken, this has really changed our perception for equity and inclusion in the classroom. I have students this semester who are in different countries. I have students who are traveling because they have ill family members and they're needing to go to different states, and it's not impacting their classes. They are able to keep going. And so I do think that we're going to see somewhat of a permanent shift to increasing different types of availability for our courses, both for lab and lecture. And I'd like to see that expands from K through 12 all the way up to even professional training. There are some types of courses that can be done really well and creatively, doing them remotely or hybrid or strictly in person. But I think we're going to see a stable shift to including these long-term.
I'll just say when we get off of this webinar, I'm going to go into an assessment evaluation with people from across the country for a very large course taught to students across the US, and to evaluate how well that online course worked relative to our previous in-person experiences. And so I think it affects all of us, and it expands the opportunity to reach different people. We're nearing the end. I think it would be really interesting. Each of you is going to have a different perspective in a different section. I think it'd be nice for you to have a final comment, a great insight to finish things off. Let's start with you, Somali, since you started talking about this first.
Okay, well, I would just say that, I'm excited to read the manuscripts that come in, because I think, this forced us to go into the online remote learning format, but it also opened doors for many, many new things. As Miriam pointed out and others pointed out, educators have been really creative and they really upped the game. So what are those practices that are there? Bring them out and, let's talk about them.
Thanks so much. Carlos.
I'll echo that and say that I'm excited to see what we can continue doing from these innovative activities or experiments we did in our classes. What will stick based on not only student perceptions, but long-term impact on both students, graduate student TAs, and faculty. So I'm excited to see what people are doing and how it's having an impact.
Thank you. Samantha.
So, this is really interesting because I feel like March 2020, we had this sudden chaotic shift. And since that time, we've all learned, we've all developed, we've created new curricula, we've tried to engage with our students, but we've all gone in our own directions trying to do this. And so to me, I'm really interested in compiling all of this and seeing how each of us have just developed these ideas and how we can put them together.
Miriam.
I think I have two things to say, but the first thing is I would love to see authors push themselves to not only talk about what they've been doing and what they've developed, but also to explore what their findings and findings of others mean for the future of learning and how. So I think that one of the most interesting things to come out of this is not just what we're doing now, but how, did an incident that was so traumatic for so many, how did that shape learning and teaching, and how will it shape it moving forward? So I think that I'm really, really interested in that part of the issue. The second thing is don't be afraid to reach out to us and ask us if you have any questions about fit for your manuscript. If you're struggling with something, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to help.
And I'll just add, I think sometimes it takes a crisis to make people undergo big shifts in the way they think about things. And clearly COVID has made us think more about the benefits and challenges of in-person versus online education. And I'm really looking forward to this as well, to learn from so many people in ways that will influence the way I personally teach in the future. So I think we're all really excited about this opportunity, and we look forward to your submissions as we go forward. And with that, Rachel, would you like to finish things off with a comment maybe about the next JMBE Live and where we're going?
Yeah. So check your chat box into there. I just posted a link to our JMBE Live website, and our next event will be Friday, October 8th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And on that website is the topics that you'll hear about through the end of the year. And we have 3 very exciting papers from diverse parts of biology education. So please join us. You registered once. You don't have to register again. You'll receive an email reminder the day before the event with the link. So with that, thank you so much for attending today. We really appreciate hearing all of the editors' thoughts and opinions and contributing to the advancement of biology education. Thank you for coming. See you next time on October 8th.